AMD Ryzen 7 9700X and Ryzen 5 9600X Zen 5 CPUs tested at both default and PBO configs, 2% uplift in Cyberpunk. AMD's Ryzen 7 9700X and Ryzen 5 9600X Zen 5 inches CPUs have been tested in newly leaked benchmarks at both default and PBO configurations. AMD's Ryzen 7 9700X Zen 5 inches 8-core CPU appears with Ryzen 9 9700X labeled on IHS, tested along with 6-core Ryzen 5 9600X in both default and PBO configurations. AMD's first Ryzen 9000 Zen 5 inches desktop CPUs, the Ryzen 7 9700X and Ryzen 5 9600X, are just a few weeks away from launch. We have seen several benchmarks, but now we have new ones that cover both default and PBO configurations of these chips. The Ryzen 7 9700X is an 8-core chip and the Ryzen 5 9600X is a 6-core chip. These chips target mainstream audiences and should carry price points similar to the existing family, if not higher/lower. AMD Ryzen i300 Strix APU-powered laptops launched, combines Zen 5 CPU, RDNA 3.5 GPU and XDNA 2 NPU cores, first eye shot pictured. In terms of performance, the AMD Ryzen 7 9700X 8-core CPU scored 863 points in CPU-Z's single-core and 8,237 points in multi-core tests. In Cinebench, the chip scored 2,218 points in single-core and 20,125 points in multi-core tests. These tests were conducted with the default power profile. With PBO enabled, the scores jumped to 887 points for CPU-Z single-core and 8,748 points in the multi-core tests, while the Cinebench scores jumped to 2,280 points in single-core and 21,533 points in multi-core tests. Following is the breakdown of the default versus PBO performance. The AMD Ryzen 5 9600X 6-core CPU scored 849 points in single-core and 6,179 points in multi-core with NCPUS and in Cinebench R23. The chip scored 2,160 points in single-core and 16,205 points in the multi-core tests at default power configuration. With PBO enabled, the CPU scored 875.2 points in single-core and 6,595 points in multi-core tests in CPU-Z, while in Cinebench R23, it scored 2,244 points in single-core and 17,037 points in the multi-core test. Following is the breakdown of the default versus PBO performance. Ryzen 5 9600X, default versus PBO performance. As you can see, the AMD Ryzen 7 9700X sees an average 3% uplift in single-core and 6.5% uplift in multi-core performance with PBO enabled, while the Ryzen 5 9600X yields a 3.5% gain in single-core and 5.5% improvement in multi-core scores with PBO enabled. Following is how the performance of both chips stacks up against current-gen offerings. Additionally, a single gaming performance metric of the AMD Ryzen 7 9700X 8-core CPU has also been shared. The CPU was running alongside the NVIDIA GeForce RTX 4080 GPU in Cyberpunk 2077 with both default and PBO configurations. The game was running at 720p to evaluate the CPU side performance. At default, the chip scored 251.05 FPS on average, and with PBO enabled, the FPS jumped to 256.26, a 2% improvement. Following is a breakdown of the Cyberpunk 2077 test. The temperatures and power numbers are also shared for the AMD Ryzen 7 9700X Zen 5 inches CPU, which peaks out at 66°C and 87.8 watts under the AIDA 64 stress test. Also, It is revealed that the CPU was delivered with an erroneous IHS which labels the chip as the Ryzen 9 9700X, whereas the true naming convention should be Ryzen 7 9700X. It is believed that a wrong label on a certain batch might be the reason for the Ryzen 9000 Zen 5" desktop CPU delay. However, AMD revealed to us that the issue stemmed from poor quality during testing. AMD's Ryzen 9000 Zen 5" desktop CPUs will be hitting retail shelves in August, with the Ryzen 7 9700X and Ryzen 5 9600X being the first to hit the market on the 8th of August, so stay tuned for more on the next AM5 family.